but this is the first one I read. December 15th of 44. Ships sunk off along a POW. 1,000 to 1,400 guards continuously firing into hold of POWs. Men fired at while in water swimming ashore. Major A.C. Peterson was wounded in the head. No food arrived ashore in G-string, as did most of others. Major Nerlinger was one of the killed. U.S. planes did not fire after recognizing American Captain Wiley Little, ordnance officer, headed for opposite shore. Captain Don Haynes, 192nd Tank Battalion, deceased. Major Peterson's head wound assisted by Major Glassburn. When I read that, I knew that something was going on. This is the little town, as it were, of Indianola. It's an old little village here on Puget Sound. And you're right, this is the original location of the dock that McGrath would have walked 40 some odd years ago. You've got Suquamish Reservation, home of Chief Self to the west, and Agate Pass Bridge, and behind us we have, in the clouds there in the rain, we have the city of Seattle and Magnolia and Ballard. So this is kind of centrally located in the middle of Puget Sound. It's a nice quiet little place. I came by way of the journal from a caregiver that was cleaning out the old cabin that was somewhat behind us here on the bluff here at Indianola. The woman, Mrs. Cox, had either passed on or was being taken to a rest home, but the caregivers were instructed to take the boxes and the garbage and the books and send them to Hansville, to a transfer station, a dump site. They were cleaning out an old home here. And between where we are here in Indianola and where the dump site is in Hansville, there's a town called Kingston, Washington, which it's a bustling little hub that has antique stores and shops and things, and they stopped there on their way to the dump to see if they could sell the boxes of books rather than deposit them at the dump.
Jonathan, we're here today at a site that is now an art gallery, but when you found the journal, it was a secondhand shop. Tell us about that.
This is the place where I first set eyes on the journal, and a box of books, I should say. Right here behind me, in the corner of this Kingston Art Gallery. Not so long ago, a few years back, it was a second-hand store, and my friend Tom ran it. Tom Newton, he was a 31-year Master Chief in the United States Navy, and he hadn't gone into the box of books.
What form was the journal in when you found it, and was that the original form of McGrath's ideas?
It's the form I found it in, the original journal, the personal journal of Officer Junior Grade James Merrill McGrath, was actually transcribed onto Navy typing paper from a like a board, a Navy flip board, I think they called them back then. But basically, what McGrath, how he kept notes clandestinely from the Japanese for that amount of time is he wrote on debris.
When did you find the journal, and for how long have you been doing research on this topic?
This will be my third year. I found it in May of 2004. This will be my third year with the journal. For the first year, I'm really not sure what I had. I found uncanceled stamps from New Caledonia and New Hebrides, from Manila, all over the Philippines, Japan, and currency, Japanese and Chinese currency. The thing that was the most astonishing thing in the box, of course, was the original journal that I found in the box of books, in the pages, folded flat. It was, and I started to read things that I really didn't understand at first. I didn't have the whole picture well enough to know what I was reading. I had contacted Mr. Helm, Commander Helm of the Naval Operational Archive to help me in my research. And basically, at first, in the very beginning, there was a concern that what we had was not genuine, that it was a fake or some kind of not a genuine article. The reason being is that there are details in the journal that were not known to history. And so he suggested that I have the journal authenticated by a military historical association.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what was the result of that?
I took it to the Washington State Military Historical Association first at the Armory in Tacoma, and where I met a gentleman, an attorney, and when I showed him the journal, he sat down and he called a couple of the other older gentlemen over, veterans from World War II. They have the hats with Pearl Harbor and the hats of their ships and the memorial stuff, and basically he called over some people that had expertise from Manila, and it was a very tearful thing, but what he said right then, Marco, is that what I have is a museum piece. After it was authenticated, I didn't seek any publicity when I at first got a grasp of what I had. I didn't seek publicity. I kept on the road to find the family, which turned out to be an adventure in its own self, a research adventure. But basically, I was approached by an editor with the Peninsula Daily News who had heard about this. I had done some research with the Maryland Ring Timber Company. McGrath was born in a timber town called Pisht, Washington State, on the Strait of Juan de Fuca. He was born in a logging camp, and basically it's owned by Maryland Ring Timber Company. It was then, and it still is today. So I did research with the Maryland Ring Timber Company to flesh out that, and they had a friend at the paper who called me and said, you know, a POW journal from the only known POW journal from a Clallam County descendant had surfaced, and AP Wire Services did pick it up, and I heard it was in 110 newspapers nationwide. So and it's been picked up by many papers since then. The family, a Navy officer told me one time that if you're ever looking for somebody and they're Navy, if somebody's from Kansas or from Iowa, if they're from the plains and they join the Navy, sometimes that when they retire from the Navy, they stay at their duty station because Bremerton is more beautiful than Iowa, or because they fall in love with their duty stations, and that happens a lot. And so basically I started to look for McGrath descendants in every Navy city nationwide, and I started alphabetically with Annapolis, then on to Bethesda, Bremerton, Charlotte, down to the Detroit Great Lakes Detachment, and all the way down to Hawaii, San Diego. I went, but after almost 1,500 inquiries to find the family, I'd come to a dead end. I was leaving messages for months on voicemails and such saying, if you are related to James Merrill McGrath, a prisoner of war from World War II, please return my call. And I did this for months and months. Anybody named McGrath in any one of the cities I could find, I Googled, I Zaba searched, I did every private investigative technique I could find to find this person. A lot of people think it's easier now with the internet to find people, but with the privacy acts and everything that are in place today, it's much more difficult to just get on the phone and contact somebody. Luckily, my daughter is 7 years old, and she's in kindergarten over here. She's in first grade now. She was in kindergarten last year, and one of her, when we went to a teacher's night at the elementary, there was a list. This is literally 1 block away from my home. And McGrath was a California guy, even though born in the Pacific Northwest in a logging camp at Pisht, Washington State on the coast. McGrath was a California guy, and at my daughter's elementary, there was a list of faculty, and the librarian was listed as McGrath. I thought after the 1,500 inquiries I made, this was a dead end, but I had to try. So at the family night, I went to Librarian McGrath and asked her if she was any relation to a prisoner of war from World War II named James Merrill McGrath, and she said no. No, she wasn't any relation, but it was her husband's father's brother. The girls, though, after contacting them, knew all about the journal. knew about all the passages. Dad had told them every story, but this was his private thing. He had never given the journal to the girls to take to school to show and tell or to read aloud. It was kind of his own personal healing thing, we believe. But why it was left here, I don't know.
Where is the action of the journal? What location?
It starts in the Philippines during the beginning days of World War II. In Manila, McGrath was a senior officer in Manila, and the fall of Manila was a pretty bad one. I've done research around it and through the McGrath Journal, and what we have found is it was chaos. We were told to surrender by our Allied forces. We were told to surrender because we were overwhelmed.
We as being the Americans?
We being the Americans, yeah. We had a presence, I've now found through history, we have had a presence in Manila since 1898 in the Spanish-American War. James Merrill McGrath was a United States naval officer, and he was stationed in the Philippines. He was the senior officer in what is now referred to as air conditioning and ventilation and steam engineering. His father in the logging camp where he was born was a bookkeeper and a steam engineer for the old logging camp steam donkeys. So he knew as a kid that he was interested in that kind of engineering, and he was the senior officer in Manila for the United States Navy at the time he was captured the first time.
Tell us about the first time that McGrath was captured.
James Merrill McGrath was captured the first time, and I use the word captured loosely because he was ordered to take his men that he was under control of, that he was the commander of, and to surrender. The American Allies did surrender in the Philippines to the overwhelming Japanese force, and so he assembled his men after as much havoc as they could wreak. And so food provisions, ammunition, dynamite and things couldn't be used against them. They sabotaged what they could, and then they surrendered. That was the first time. He very soon, and within just a few days, escaped. And they escaped in a fairly brilliant way. They had a landing craft, a diesel-powered landing craft, and after they escaped, him and this Captain Don Pike, they rolled these 50-gallon drums of diesel fuel into a landing craft and took off into the South China Sea, knowing that they didn't have enough gas to get across, but they could get off the island of Manila. And so they fled. Because of tide and wind and such, they came ashore on the Bataan Peninsula, on the Corregidor Peninsula, and were recaptured and taken back to Manila.
Well, I understand that Mr. McGrath eventually ended up on the Bataan Death March. How did that happen?
He did, in fact, end up on the Bataan March. I don't like to use the word death march, and I guess the survivors of the Bataan Corregidor conflict don't like the word death march either, but the Bataan Death March, the march, he was recaptured, and they were marched across to a staging area where they were sent up the Bataan Corregidor Peninsula, which is Bataan. And basically what happened is they were force marched, some of them chained together, some of them tied together, some of them just walking, but they were force marched without any nourishment for days and days and days, and they were forced until they dropped to die. They started to march them in terrible heat through the jungles and through the passes of Bataan Corregidor on their way to a place at the end of the road called Camp O'Donnell, which is a prisoner of war camp that was brutal. It was the second or third worst Japanese atrocity against Allied POWs during World War II. They had a couple of guards named Wada and Toshiro, who later hung at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal. They enjoyed killing. They They enjoyed torture. They enjoyed cutting the fingers off these men, and then when the finger dropped to the ground, pulling the Annapolis ring off. They enjoyed, their nicknames, Toshiro and Wada, were air raid. Not because an air raid was going on, but anytime they were in camp, people were dying. They enjoyed it, and they hung for their crimes. Men of war. They're talking about ships, Japanese ships. There were many men of war and some wrecked ships in the harbor. We were assembled and we were marched to an area where we were going to be separated, where the officers were going to aboard the Oroku Maru, apparently a combination of cargo and passenger ship of approximately 8,000 tons. McGrath, when they are being loaded aboard this combination of this ship, the Oroku Maru, the Hell ship, McGrath was under the impression that they were going to travel on this ship. And of course they did start and stop a few times at Olongapo, Subic Bay in the PI, Philippine Islands. But what happened is planes from the United States carrier Hornet started to bomb, dive bomb, and strafe the Oroku Maru, being a Japanese ship in occupied Manila Harbor. They bombed it almost every day. And not knowing that 1,619 naval officers, most of them field grade, the highest ratio of officers to enlisted men of any prisoner of war situation, they were bombed every day until the ship was on fire enlisting. And then they were given the order by the Japanese gun crews to abandon ship and swim the 300 to 400 yards through the surf to the shore, and where they were again captured and men shot at while in water. And he was captured again, and they were interned for 5 days in a tennis court at Olongapo, where the Hell Ship Memorial sits today. McGrath's name is on that memorial. And the names of the 1,619 servicemen that were in that dark cargo hold.
Explain the term Hell Ship.
Hell Ship is a, to put it into context, it's a cargo hold with 1,619 men in it. And the reason they called it the Hell Ship is because these men were packed so tightly into the cargo hold that the first night 40 men perished. And with McGrath's words in the journal, their apparent situation was the 40 died of suffocation, and that turned out to be true. The men were packed so tightly that they could not turn around. After the first morning, the 40 men were died of suffocation. They would have a breath check. They would turn, and anybody who was breathing was alive, and anybody who wasn't was moved man by man over against a bulkhead as a makeshift morgue. In the cargo hold with 1,600 men in the dark, with no food, very little, no water, no clothes, and at night freezing cold, and during the day extremely hot. The Hell Ship, truly hell. Matter of fact, Manny Lawton in his book Give Us This Day, he was in the Hell Ship also, and he said it's from Dante's Inferno. You couldn't see other men in there, it was so dark, but you could see the shadows, men crying out, men eating feces, men drinking urine, men killing each other. It was hell. That's how it got to the name Hell Ship. The Japanese believe that, for instance, if the journal didn't exist, they would deny it ever happened. They burn journals like mine in ceremony, a healing ceremony, a Japanese healing ceremony, because it heals the soul of, let's say, Wada, the prisoner who was the prison guard who was so brutal and committed the atrocities and who hung. If his family survived and knew, and they were, if they were able to obtain this journal, Japanese would obtain this journal and burn it in ceremony, and then they would deny it ever happened. This has happened over and over and over again. The biggest example would be the rape of Nanking. The Japanese still to this day, in 2007, June the 7th, deny the rape of Nanking.